So I guess the next place we should go after college would be starting where I started working. I started working for K-Mart in about 1963. It was just beginning, so they would take the younger people and they'd put us in Kresge stores as assistant managers and trainees. So I started as a trainee in Cleveland, Ohio, which was a little trip. A year later, they moved me to Monroe, Michigan. A year later, they moved me to Saginaw, Michigan, where I stayed for 2 years. And then they moved me to Birmingham, Michigan, where I spent a year. And after that, I got my first store in Toledo, Ohio. It was a Kresge store. It was a huge store. Back in the day, it was a very, very big store. But the unusual thing about this store, it was one of 2 union stores in the K-Mart Corporation. And they picked me to run this store because of how well I got along with people and employees and things. I actually think if they would have left the store open a couple of years longer, I could have changed it back to a regular store and taken it away from the union. So it was a little different. It was 3 stories with selling space on it, and then 2 more floors of offices. So it was just a huge corner store. On the other corner was a Woolworth store, which was just as big as the Kresge store. So a block apart, it was kind of interesting. But that store it's set in with a lot of black customers, and I would say my ratio was probably 80% black, 20% white. It had many problems as far as stealing. It had 8 doors, so I was always having to worry about people shoplifting and stealing things from us. So I become, on Saturdays, the blacks would stand out front, and the party then was the Black Panther Party, that was very strong in the United States at that time, and they'd sell their pamphlets at each of the doors. And no matter what I did, if I went out and told them to get away from the door, I would have a riot on my hands. I would have probably 50, 60 young black men in my store causing all sorts of trouble. So I had to get along with them. So every Saturday I'd go out and talk to them and let them sell their papers, and I become kind of friends with them. It was interesting, and I was just a 25-year-old white boy that was talking to these thugs, you might say, in the Black Panther Party. But one day I was telling them I'd sure like to meet their leader, Malcolm X. Malcolm X was very well known all over the world at that time. And I was just kind of saying it. I wasn't, never thought it would happen. But one of them said, well, Malcolm X is coming in 3 months to Toledo. Let me see if I can set up a meeting with him for you. I said, you gotta be kidding me. I'm just an average white boy here that just said that. I didn't really, but I would like to meet him. So they said, okay. And the fellow had enough pull that about a couple of weeks later, he came in and said, Jerry, I've got you a meeting with Malcolm X. You're going to get to spend an hour with him. And I don't know many people in the state of Michigan that would have got a chance to talk to Malcolm X for an hour. I don't know many people in the United States that would have got a chance to talk to Malcolm X for an hour. But unfortunately, the Saturday I was supposed to meet with him. The night before, there were 2 white police officers murdered in the city of Detroit, and they had to get Malcolm X out of there in a hurry because they were blaming it on the Black Panthers, and they were afraid for his life. So they got Malcolm out of there. But it would have been really interesting. What a tale it would have been to talk to him. Through the years, I got to talk to Jesse Jackson, which was another interesting man. I talked to him for 2.5 hours, just me and him. 2.5 hours in a little room. And he wasn't a bad man. I've seen him on television. He makes me mad when I see him now or before even. But when the 2 of us talked, he was a real gentleman with me. We talked about it. I told him my viewpoints and what I thought about the black-white relationships. He told me what his were. Very interesting gentleman to talk to. That store, we're going to talk a little basketball here again. One day a big, tall black fella come in, and his wife happened to work for me. And Goose was about 6'11", and he had played college basketball, and I was still young, and I liked to play basketball. And I said, hey, Goose, where could I play the best basketball in Toledo? And he said, well, Jerry, come down to the Frederick Douglass Center at 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening, and I'll meet you there. And there's all kind of pickup games there. You'll get to play a lot if you come down there. So I'm thinking nothing of it. So Tuesday night I get down there and go inside the gym, and I walk in the gym, and there's a game going on, and all of a sudden it stops. There's 40 blacks in that gym and one white man. And you know who the white man is. And one guy come up and he says, "Honky, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, Goose told me to come that I could play basketball. I like to play basketball." And he's, "Well, Goose isn't here." And Goose didn't show up that night. So it put me in a really scary situation because, again, we were going through race problems in the United States at that time. And the whites and blacks were not getting along. So the guy said, "Well, go and sit there. Somebody will probably pick you to play. You're brave coming into this gym all by yourself." I said, "Okay." So I went and sat down, and this young black man come walking up to me, and a great big lump on his head. And I found out later it was from a police baton. And he said, "Can you play honky?" I said, "Yeah, I played college, so I can play a little bit." So he said, "Well, all right, I've got the next game, so you can play with me." His name was Ray Woodson. And I played, and it was one of those nights that I was making my shots, let's say, so I did pretty well against him. I got knocked down a couple of times, dirty play, but that's all right. I was used to that. But after Ray was walking me to the door, and he said, "You know, you can play." And the guys seem to like you, so we play every Tuesday and Thursday. But here's what we're going to do. From now on, you get here at 10 to 8. I will meet you at your car. I will walk out to your car, and I will walk you in the building, and I will walk you back out afterwards. He says, "It is not safe for you to walk from your car into this gym because people are going to find out that there's a white man all by himself walking alone down here, and you're going to get jumped." He says, "Nobody's going to jump me." He said, "I'm the light welterweight champion of the state of Ohio in Golden Gloves." And he says, "I'm well known for being a very mean person." So I said, "Okay." So that's how I did my playing. In fact, a group of them, I played well enough that they asked me to play on their team. They called me the token whitey, 9 blacks and 1 white. And they thought that was funny. But the neat thing was these guys were some of them were ex-pro basketball players, and some of them all of them were college basketball players. So it was just and we got in a league, and it was a tremendous league. I got to play with professional basketball players against that I played for or watched on television for years. It was interesting. One time I was walking out, and I was walking out with 2 friends of mine on the court. We were just before the game walking out, and people started laughing. And we were looking at them and couldn't figure out what they were laughing at. Well, one of the guys I was walking at was 6'10", 260 pounds, and the other one was 6'10", 280 pounds, and I was in between them. So they thought that was quite funny that this little white guy was walking in with these 2 black guys. I ended up, because of the problems that we had with shoplifting, and for you that know what, some of you'll know what I mean, hopefully some of you won't know what I mean, but I thought my middle name was MFer because I got called that every day, and I got threatened quite often in the store. So I hired Ray as my bouncer. And Ray worked in the store, and if I got in trouble, Ray would come walking up and make sure there was no trouble. But a funny story, one day Ray says, come running up to my office, he says, "Come on, Mr. Bittner, we gotta go. I said, "Well, where we gotta go?" I said, "Well, 2 guys were down in the basement, they pushed Shirley down, they stole some radios. And I think I know where they're going, so we'll go get them." I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to go with this guy to stop 2 thieves who probably got guns, and we're going to stop them. So he said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I said, "Okay." So we take off, and we're going down through the black neighborhood, and I'm thinking, don't let us see these guys. Don't let us find them. And I said, "Well, I don't see them. I think we better go back." Ray says, "Nah, a couple more blocks." And sure enough, another block, there they are. So he says, "Let's go get them." I'm thinking, oh yeah, Ray's going to fight one, and I'm going to die with the other one. So we go up to him, and they say, "Oh, we don't want no trouble, Ray. We don't want no trouble." I didn't want any trouble, that was for sure. So he says, "Give us the radios back." So they had bags, and they give us the radios back. And Ray looks at me and says, "Mr. Bittner, you want to take them back in and call the police. And the one guy said, Ray, I can't go. We'll have to fight this out. And I said, no, let him go, let him go. But about 3-4 days later, Ray come up to me in the store and he says, hey, remember those two guys that stole the radios? I said, yeah. He said, well, one of them won't steal the radios anymore. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, I caught him last night on 3rd Street. He's in no shape to steal anything anymore. And you might not believe this, he didn't mean that he was too injured. He was dead. These guys did not fool around. They were tough guys. This was the way. In fact, Ray ended up going to prison. One night at 3 in the morning, he called me and he says, Mr. Benton, I need help. I said, what's wrong, Ray? He says, I'm in my house surrounded. The police have my house surrounded. I said, well, what happened? What'd you do? He says, well, you know my sister Savannah? I said, yeah. She's a prostitute. I said, yeah, I know. He says, well, the pimp beat her up and I killed the pimp. And somebody squealed on me. So the police have me surrounded. I said, all you can do is give up and go home or go to jail with him, and that's what he did. So he's probably spent the rest of his life in prison. But he was a nice young man, but that's the way they were, and you have to understand the times at that time. You took care of family, and that's the way they always are. And like I say, he was a nice young man. He come to my house. My 3 sons loved him. He ate dinner with us. It's just the way it was. But that was a good story, so I really enjoyed that. And the mayor heard about me playing with the team down at the Frederick Douglass Center, and he came to meet me and wanted to talk to me, and he asked me if I'd be on a board for the Black and Brown Community Relations, and I said I would. And what our job was that the government would give us money, and we would make sure it went to playgrounds or wherever it was supposed to go. But like any corrupt government, and ours in the city of Toledo at that time was corrupt, the government would send us $500,000 to work on different projects. By the time the money got to us, there may be $50,000. The rest was already taken off. Somebody took it for this, somebody took it for that. So the children of Toledo didn't get what they were supposed to get. But I did get an award from the city of Toledo for my work in the Brown community. And I did well in that store, and it was time to get promoted. So they promoted me to a store in Birmingham, Michigan. And the store in Birmingham, Michigan was a prestigious store because that's where Mr. Cunningham, Harry Cunningham, shopped. His wife shopped there. All the executives for K-Mart, Kresge Corporation shopped at that store. So I was always getting visitors in, and you were picked for that store because they thought you had potential of being a executive sometime in your career, moving up in the K-Mart Corporation. Many of the top executives ran that store. So it was a real honor getting it. It was a store that was fun to run, and like I say, it was not unusual for the president of the company to come in, and one day he came in and he said, Jerry, would you come down to the basement with me? And you don't tell the president of the largest retail corporation in the world at that time, no, and he's the most important person in retail at that time. So him and I went in the basement, and I had no idea why he wanted me in the basement. So we went down there, and thank goodness it was clean and neat and everything. And he looked around and said, oh, good looking store, Jerry. So I'll ask you a question. He said, I want an honest answer. I said, yes, sir. He said, do you practice honest operation? And what honest operation meant is, did I hide the fact that sometimes there were things stolen, sometimes bookkeeping wasn't right, sometimes the receiving ledger wasn't right. There's all things that money could go missing. Now, if money would go missing, let's say you had 2% waste, money missing, you would either get demoted or you'd stay in that store. Now, if you didn't have, let's say you had a 0.5 point, then you could get promoted to a bigger store, you'd be looked good upon. So what you could do is, let's say, we'll take this bottle for example. This bottle here, let's say that I paid 50 cents for this bottle, and on the books I said I sold it for $1, so I should make 50 cents. Well, if I'm a good merchant, I know I can sell this bottle for $1.25. So on the books it shows that I would sell it for $1.50, but I would also be taking 25 cents more and that would cover up what other people were stealing. And that's what honest operations was called. And Mr. Cunningham believed that you should show what you were missing. But I said to him, I said, Mr. Cunningham, if I show the waste that we really have in this store, you'll never promote me. Nobody will ever promote me in this company, and every one of us know that. So I would say out of 100 of us, I'd say 99 of us do not practice honest operation. Now, if it would have been anybody else in the corporation, any other person, I would have been fired on the spot. But Mr. Cunningham was the type of man that looked at me and said, Jerry, I appreciate your honesty. We walked back upstairs, said bye, and if my wife comes in, tell her I said hi, and away he went. I never heard anything about that conversation with him from anybody at any time. I actually think he kept it to himself. He wasn't pleased. He didn't want to hear that. He wanted to hear that, yeah, we all practiced honest operation. But he was a good enough gentleman. I learned from him at that point that when people are honest to me, you take that and you don't do something with it. If you want that person to be honest, then you better not retaliate against them. So that was a great lesson with Mr. Cunningham. He also one day came in and we had some new things, rubber bands that you tied your hair up, the ponytail holders are called today, from the Goody Corporation. And I had a big round table and I had it full of them. I mean, I had probably 400 of them out there. And this wasn't a big store, a lot of business. And he came in and he saw that, Jerry, what are you doing? Why would you have all these ponytail holders? I said, Mr. Cunningham, they really sell. And I said, not only that, if I bought $500 worth, I got an extra 25% off. And also for this month, there's a 10% off. So I said, I make 50%, and then I get 35 more percent, so I'm making 85% on every one I sell. He says, how many you sold? I said, I don't know. I said, I know I sold a lot. He said, well, let's count them. How long have they been here? I said, a week. So here's the most important man in retail of the day, taking these little ponytail holders and throwing them in a basket one at a time, counting them to see how many I sold. He says, you only had these out here for a week? I said, yes. He says, you sold half of them and at 85%. He says, I'm going up to your office, I got to use your phone. I said, okay. He says, let's go. So I went up to the office, and he got at the office and he called the buyer, who was head of the K-Mart Corporation for the hair tie division and all that, for all hair products. And he says, I want 100,000, 100 dozen ponytail holders sent to every K-Mart in the United States today. And I want 50 dozen sent to every Kresge store. It's the largest single order the Goody Company had ever received, and probably to this day has ever received. It was a huge order, all because Mr. Cunningham walked into my store. Because of that, and I think for many years that story was told, a lot of people in the industry knew who I was, and I was considered one of the best merchants in the industry. We can go into that more on. I think God gives you certain talents. He did give me the talent to be a good merchant. When we get into talking about Alaska Commercial, you'll understand how that talent turned a complete company around later on. That was my first store, or my second store. So after that store, I went into the K-Mart as a co-manager in Toledo, and there's not much to stay there. Just a co-manager, the manager is in charge of the K-Mart, and you're just helping him day-to-day jobs. There's nothing thrilling about that whatsoever. But they sent me, the next store was to Thousand Oaks, California, my first K-Mart. After my Kresge career, of course, I moved down to my first K-Mart, which was in Thousand Oaks, California. I was in Toledo at that time, being a co-manager. My wife was 7 months pregnant. We had 2 children, and they called me and said, we'd like to move from Toledo to Thousand Oaks, California, which is just outside Los Angeles. I said, I really can't go now. My wife is 7 months pregnant. We've got a family. I can't just get up and move. They said, Mr. Bittner, you have 3 days to get there. And that was not unusual for K-Mart or Kresge Gordon. They gave you 3 days to get wherever they wanted you to go. So I said, well, I'll go, but you got to have someone flying the plane when my wife comes out to help her. She just can't handle two kids and a baby coming at the same time. And they agreed to that. So I said, okay. So I took off and drove, and I got to Thousand Oaks, California. What they didn't tell me about the K-Mart in Thousand Oaks, California, was it was the lowest producing store in the K-Mart chain. In other words, it was the worst store you could get in the K-Mart. And they gave it to me, so I was not thrilled. But I found out why. Again, it was a union situation. I was trying to be unionized. Since I ran a unionized Kresge store, they thought I would have more knowledge about how to handle a union. And also, it had tremendous waste. Money was missing, tremendous amount of money for a store that size. And when I got there, I found out why. It was an interesting situation again. The union wasn't a problem for me because I get along with employees, and we battled the union, and we actually tossed the union out. They didn't get a foothold in there, so I won that battle. But the battle was the stealing. The man that ran it before me, they had demoted to a assistant manager. They took him out of management because he had so much money missing. And he was a man that had 8 kids, and his wife was dying of cancer at the time. And this staff that he had was stealing him blind. The first week I was there, I pulled what we call a package check. When people were leaving, the employees could buy things, and they'd staple a thing on them that they paid for it and so on. And as they left the store the night as we closed, people would just check that stamp and make sure it was okay. I said, now tonight what we're going to do is we're going to open each package, we're going to check to make sure the amount on that receipt is the same as in the bag. Well, that night alone, I think we come up with over $400 stealing. 6 girls admitted to stealing for at least a year. There were other people also caught in the same thing. I ended up firing 9 people my second week there. And you'd think that you'd get a lot of problems, but the people that were still there didn't put up a fuss, and it was easy to hire people at that time in that area, so we got new people in a hurry. Then I was checking the film department in pictures, where you take pictures and you come in and you get them redone, and you sell the people bring in their film and you put them into pictures, and then they pay for it and go back. So I started going through some of that, and I found that they were stealing, the camera department were stealing money. They were putting fictitious names on some of them, George Washington and Ulysses Grant. And the other interesting thing I found in going through them, the pictures and stuff, is my neighbor next door, nudes of her, across the street, nudes of her. My cameraman was quite the fancy Dan. Half my store was in there nude. Ended up again firing about 10 people just over that. So we cleaned out that mess. Then I got to the garden shop, and the third guy that worked in the garden shop come to me and said, Mr. Bittner, the guy that runs the garden shop is stealing truckloads of plants. I said, well, how did he steal them? He has them delivered somewhere else, and then he just signs the bill that they came here. So sure enough, I check, and he was doing it. So I caught him, got him to go to jail at least. So then I catch the second guy in the garden shop, who I promoted then to manager, caught him stealing. And then the guy that told me about the first guy caught him stealing. So it was just nothing but thieves in this one little store. It wasn't little, it was a K-Mart, so it was a good size. But that's why I wasn't making any profit. My second K-Mart I was at was Riverside, California. Probably the most interesting thing that happened there was that I went to speak at the Hopi Indian tribe school. And after I spoke, the teachers were impressed, and they asked if I would help them maybe teach their students a little bit about retailing so that they could get jobs out in the community. So what I did was I got a cash register, had it set up in one of their classrooms, brought over some shelving, some different things, and built them an actual little store within inside one of their classrooms. And started my people coming over from my K-Mart, teaching them how to run registers, how to stock shelves, how to do things. So many of the kids got jobs either at K-Mart or Walmart or Target or places like that because they got trained in their little classroom school. So that was probably the most interesting thing. It was a nice size K-Mart and did a pretty good job there. So the company decided that they would make me a district manager over 13 K-Marts in San Diego, California. So I was sent to San Diego. Interesting, they gave me a $10,000 job, and it cost me almost $40,000 more for a house in San Diego area. So it wasn't what you'd call a good financial move. And I complained a little bit about it, and they kind of just told me to shut up and do my job. I had a good time there. We enjoyed it. My wife Crystal and I had a beautiful home, pool, the whole bit. We were living the California dream, I guess you can say. But the only problem is I had to drive all over San Diego, which is very, very busy city with a lot of cars. I remember the Christmas season, I tracked how many miles I drove, and I drove 1,300 miles in the city of San Diego from one Kmart to the other Kmart. It was a prestigious job, but there's only 200 Kmart district managers. So you were taken into the office once in a while, and it was a big deal. You're a big deal, I guess, when you're a district manager. Enjoyed my time there, and then they called one day and said, "We'd like to move you to Phoenix or to Tucson, Arizona." It's the 8th best store in the chain. At that time, we had 2,300 Kmarts. It was a very, very profitable store. I wasn't real thrilled about going back to running a store, but it didn't bother me because I really did enjoy running stores. The interesting thing about that store was that I had an all Mexican American staff, and many people put down Mexican Americans. They say they're lazy, they don't do this, they don't do that. I found it to be just the opposite. It was probably the best staff I had anywhere I'd ever been. And I enjoyed my time in Tucson. It was a beautiful city, great restaurants. Of course, the weather was fantastic. So it was an interesting assignment. But I got itchy feet again. I saw Price Club started in their 3rd store in Tucson, and I visited it often, and I was quite impressed with it. So one day when the president of Kmart happened to be in my store, Ben Fawbury, we were talking over lunch, and I said, "Mr. Fawbury, you got about an hour today? I want to show you a new business at Price Club that's starting." He said, "Well, I've heard of that." He said, "I don't think it's much. It's just an old warehouse and it has merchandise." I said, "No, this is a brand new one. They built it from scratch. I think you got to come over and take a look at it. I really do think it's the future of retailing." So he said, "All right, I got an hour. Let's go." So we went over, we spent that hour, and after we toured Price Club and left and got outside the building, I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "Well, Jerry, it's really impressive, but I don't think it's going to last. It's just a fad. It's only going to be here for a couple of years." I said, "Okay." You know, if Kmart would have got into the warehouse club business at that time, they would have been probably the biggest warehouse club company. There would be no Costco. They had the money at the time. They had the expertise. They had the contacts with all the suppliers. They could have put up 200 warehouse clubs in 2-3 years and owned the market. Today, the warehouse clubs are one of the most profitable businesses going. Costco is tremendously successful, as is Walmart's warehouse club. So I think we missed an opportunity there, and 2 years later I got a note from Ben Fawbury saying, "Jerry, you were right, we should have went into the business when we talked about it." So I felt pretty good about that. But again, I saw that business and I just loved it. So I thought if I could get enough investors, maybe I could start that. So I got some friends of mine and some family members, especially my sister, and we raised about, I guess $500,000. And we went to open one in Spokane, Washington, where I was familiar with business. And we had a small one. It was only about 39,000 square foot, where the big ones, Costco's, are 100,000 square foot. So we got it started, we were doing okay, and all of a sudden I see 2 gentlemen walking through taking notes, and I went up to them and I said, "Excuse me, I see you're taking notes. Could I ask where you're from? And they said, well, my name is Jeff Brotman and this is Jim Sinegal. And those are the two founders of Costco. And they had opened one in Seattle that was very successful. They had opened one in Portland that was very successful. And they said, you know, we can't let you get open here. He said, so we're going to come and open one in Spokane. I mean, very honest. Jim Sinegal was probably the most honest man I've ever met. We're sorry, but we're just going to have to do it. So they opened, and after they opened, Jim happened to be in the store, and I saw him. I said, thanks, Jim. I'm going to have to close this up and start looking for a job somewhere pretty soon. He said, you don't have to look for a job. You've got a job. I said, what do you mean? He said, we'll hire you tomorrow. I said, as soon as you get this closed, give me a call, and we'll fly you to Seattle, and we'll talk, and we'll give you the store here in Spokane to run for now. So I said, okay. The interesting about when I flew to Seattle, Jim said, just look for somebody with a sign up with your name on it and they'll bring you to the office. So I got off the plane and I walked down the ramp, and I didn't have to look for the sign because there stood Jim Sinegal, the president, founder of Costco, waiting to take me to the office to meet all the other people at the office. I thought that was really neat on his part. And when I become president, CEO of a company up in Alaska, I always did the same thing. Whenever a new manager was coming to town, I didn't have anybody else pick him up. I picked him up. Even if it was the meat manager, it didn't matter. And I made sure I took him out to lunch that first day. And I think that really was a big factor in building the organization I built up in Alaska. But anyway, so I went with Jim and they did hire me. I was running the store in Spokane, doing really well, and a couple of gentlemen come walking in one day and said, could we talk to you? And I said, okay. And they said, why are you working for Costco when you could be out on your own doing your own thing? And I didn't think I really wanted to do that, but I said, well, I'll listen to you. So they told me how we could do it by offering public stock, and I didn't know nothing about public stock. But I was interested to learn, so they said, all you have to do, and the guy gave me a list of 20 names. And he said, go to these houses, knock on the doors, and tell them you want $10,000, and I told you to give it to you. I said, 20 people, I'm going to go to their door, and I'm going to knock on the door, and they're going to give me $10,000. He says, yeah, just do it. So away I went. And you know, I'd go to a door, and I'd say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm starting a business. And Mr. Haverson said to tell you to give me $10,000. I'll give you a receipt for it, and you'll own 10,000 shares of stock right off the bat. And everybody handed me $10,000. It was amazing. So I had $200,000 of feed money to start trying to find a exchange, a brokerage house to cover my stock offering, and get started. My stock, I got to buy stock at 23 cents a share, which was unbelievable. So I said, okay. So I borrowed $13,000 and bought, I think it was 600,000 shares of stock at that time. Still didn't have any idea what I was doing. And we went to a brokerage house, and I had a brokerage house that was in both Spokane and in Seattle. And they contacted a couple other ones, and they said, we can raise $2.5 million for you to get your first warehouse started. And I said, well, that'll be enough. So away we went, and sure enough, the stock offering went through. Opening day, the stock went to $9 a share. Now remember, I owned 600,000 shares. So on that day, in one day, I made $5.4 million off the stock market. So that, I guess, is the American dream. We didn't know where we were going to put the first store. I thought maybe we'd put it in smaller markets like Missoula, Montana, or maybe Billings, Montana. And so we went to Missoula first to get started. And within 1 week after we announced we were going there, Costco all of a sudden is going to build a store in Missoula, Montana. So I said, well, that ain't going to work. That's too small a community to have a Costco in one of ours. We're called Safeco. So I said, you know, I know that Jim Sinegal and Sol Price have an agreement that Jim Sinegal will not go into the state of California. So I think, let's go to Riverside, California. So I went to Riverside. We found a really good location, a nice sized building, and we started building. And once we got it open, 3 months later, Costco comes to California. First time ever that the agreement was broken between Sol Price and Costco. So they were just 2.5 miles down the road. So they really did run us out of business. I had a chance to sell some of my stock and get out of the business, so I did. Unfortunately, at the same time, I was setting up another stock agreement up in Canada, up in Vancouver, to open 3 stores in Vancouver because we couldn't get the one going down in California, keep it going in California. I had to give that up, and Costco actually bought all 3 locations from me, which was kind of neat, so I got out of debt there. But I had a lease on one of the buildings, so I had to go bankrupt. So that was a fun experience to go through. In bankruptcy, they leave you with $10,000. They'll sell your furniture, car, and everything else. But since I had such good credit going in, the banks did not sell my home, did not take my furniture. They trusted me, and we actually paid off things like piano that we had and some furniture we had bought. So we paid off most everything. And the interesting thing, in the middle of bankruptcy, I bought 2 new cars and a new house, which is unheard of. So I got an opportunity to go to work for a company in Chicago called Warehouse Club. They brought me in as the vice president of merchandise operations. That was an organization that did about $280 million at the time. They were down, they had lost money the first 3 years. I was able to change a lot of their infrastructure within the building and their how they ran the business, how they hired the people, what they were paying, cut down waste immediately. Waste was very high. There were a lot of stealing. We were able to put in some different type of reports to help the managers. They had 12 stores. I wrote a 181-page operational efficiency report that they used, and it really did pay off. After 2 years, they were making money. And I happened to be walking through one of the warehouses one day, and a man stopped me, and they said, "Is your name Bittner?" I said, "Yes, it is." And the man introduced himself, and he worked for Walmart. And he says, "Sam Walton has heard about you." That was kind of interesting. Sam Walton at the time was the richest man in the United States, probably the richest man in the world at that time. And he had heard about me. I was thrilled. And the guy, he said he would really like to talk to you. He's got a business opportunity for you. Would you be interested in driving down to Joliet, Illinois in a couple of weeks to meet with Sam? Well, to get a chance to meet the richest man in the world and the guy who I really respected tremendously from the business world, yeah, I could drive 100 and some miles to meet with Mr. Walton. So one of the proudest moments, I guess, in my life was I was walking down the aisle of a Walmart, and there's a gentleman walking towards me, and he gets about 10 feet from me, and he said, "Well, Mr. Bittner, it sure is nice to meet you." And it was Sam Walton. Just to have Sam Walton know who I was, I mean, that was unbelievable. We spent the day together, and I found him a tremendously enjoyable, charming, just a neat man, and very respectful to me. He asked if I'd fly to Bentonville, Arkansas, and tour the offices there. He wanted to give me an offer. He said, "Would you bring your wife with you? You can look at houses. We'd like to really show you a good time." I said, "Well, Mr. Walton, I have a pretty good job right now. I'm a vice president." He says, "But that has 28 stores." He says, "You realize how big Walmart is?" I said, yes, sir. He said, "We're opening warehouse clubs just like Costco. We need someone with some expertise in the operational side of it. We sure would like to have you come and at least take a look." So I said, "Okay." So my wife and I, Crystal, we flew to Bentonville, spent a couple days there looking at homes. There were 3 of them for sale. That's right, 3 homes, that's all there was. We go out at night in the fanciest restaurants, and everybody there would be from Walmart, because Bentonville isn't a big place. Mr. Walton, again, was his charming self. And it was just, a really good visit, but it really wasn't something that I wanted to do. And I told Mr. Walton, I said, you know, Mr. Walton, it's a tremendous opportunity, but I'm not interested. And he says, okay. And he was a gentleman. And I went back to Chicago, and about a week later, the assistant chairman of the board of Walmart came to Chicago and called me and said, could we have supper tonight? And I said, okay. And the job offer was that they would give me, I would work in the store in Juliet, run it, actually open, it was a new store, for 6 months. Then I'd be a district manager for 6 months, and then I'd be the regional manager for the New York, Boston area. In other words, I'd be in the Walmart chain on the operational side. I'd be the number 3 person, which would be a tremendous honor, which is, you know, with Walmart as big as it is. The only people above me would have been Mr. Walton, and then the vice chairman of the board, and then one other person, and then it would be me as far as operational running the Walmart Costco clubs. Get a little dry here, but we're going to go on because we want to get this finished. The man that came to see me, sit down with me, we talked for 2 hours, and when we got done, he says, you're still not going to join us, are you? And I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, did you know you're only one of 2 men Mr. Walton's ever tried hired outside of the organization? Everybody else we've moved up. You'd be one of 2 men that would ever be hired for an executive position within Walmart. I said, well, that's a fantastic honor, but I'm just not interested. At that point, the man stood up and looked at me and said, and this is his words, you're a goddamn fool. And he walked out. I still don't think I was. It wasn't a job for me. It meant I would live in Bentonville. My wife and I live in Bentonville. I'd get on a plane on the Monday morning, fly to Boston or New York, wherever I wanted to live, by myself, fly back on Friday afternoon, attend the Saturday morning meeting, which sometimes lasted all the way into Saturday evening. So I'd have one day with my wife, and I didn't think that was the way I wanted to live. And I don't think many people would. So I turned them down. At the same time, I was getting pursued by a company in Michigan, where my family was. My mother and father were getting up in years, and I thought it'd be great to move back to Michigan and spend some time with them. It was the family discount stores out of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and they were all over Michigan. They were really interesting stores. Sam Walton actually visited them before he started Walmart, and they were much like a mini Walmart. It would be kind of mini Walmarts in small little villages, like I wanted to do with my Costco things. And it was a good chance to do some merchandising, and they hired me as the vice president of merchandising, and I enjoy the merchandising side even more than I do the operational side. By the way, another interesting thing was the man that came to me, first of all, for Sam Walton, said, we've heard you're the best operational man in the business. Well, remember long ago, Mr. Cunningham thought I was one of the best merchants in the business. So this gave me a chance to get back to do what I really love to do. So I did take the job. The company was failing. It had 29 stores. And we turned it around just with merchandising, getting the right merchandise on our side of the thing. The food, they brought in a vice president for food at the same time, and he was brilliant. Between the two of us, with the merchandising side of it and the operational side, we just turned the thing around in a hurry. I had buyers. I took them to Chicago on a buying trip the first time. All I can say is those buyers, the first trip I took them, they were drunk probably 90% of the time. When we got back, I told them all point blank, if they ever got drunk on a trip again, I'd fire them on the spot. They just weren't workers, and it took us a while to turn them around. One of the fellows thought that he should have got the job I got. Took me a while to get him straightened out. So there were some problems there. It was the first time I've ever had to be a tough person with people, but that organization needed it at that time. And we turned that around and really got it going, and it started making so much money that the owner, a very young man, decided he was going to sell all 28 stores off one by one. And by doing this, he would make an awful lot of money because he owned the properties also. So he started selling them, and I could tell, this company isn't going to be here very long. They were a good company. They paid me well. The bonuses were excellent after we got it turned around. We had a house that we just loved right on the river. Everything was going well, but we knew we were going to have to move. So as I was reading one of the business journals one day, I come across a job in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Now that may sound strange, but it was an ad that was really interesting. They wanted to build a superstore, the first superstore in the Middle East, and they needed someone to overrun the complete project. And by complete project, I can remember Sheikh Abdullah Al-Hamrani taking me out in the desert the first time, out of Jeddah, and we get out of his limousine and we're standing there and he says, "Mr. Jerry, build a building, hire the people, buy the goods, sell the goods, I go now." Oh, I said, wait, I'm a merchant. I don't build buildings and go all over the world hiring people. He said, "Mr. Jerry, we hire you for everything." I said, "Well, do I have a budget?" And he said, "Yeah, you have a budget. It's $21 million. Do with it what you must." And he gets back in the car, and I'm standing in the desert, and he starts, wait. Oh, he comes back and says, "Oh, you need ride back to town." I said, "Yeah, I need ride back to town." So that's how it all got started. I later on, when I asked Sheikh Abdullah, because I'd seen all the other resumes, and I said, "Sheikh Abdullah, why'd you hire me? I've looked at the other resumes, and some of the people were fantastic. They sent out searches all over the world for someone to come into Saudi Arabia and build a superstore." And by the way, when they say superstore, a Walmart is typically maybe a large one is 150,000, a big Walmart, okay? This store was 250,000 square foot, so almost double the size of a Walmart. Now think about going to a foreign country, having to build a building and fill that building with merchandise for 250,000 square foot. Hire the people, train the people, that's a job. But I thought it'd be an interesting job, so I actually accepted it. So here I was in a hotel in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.